be present. However, Chairman Choi Tae-won of SK Group has sent us a special message. Good morning, everyone. I am Choi Tae-won. First, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum where renowned scholars and experts gather to discuss the futures of science and technology and national strategy. Today, the global techno-geopolitical tension is escalating, and its implication reaches the national security, which makes today's forum even more important. Korea is leading the world in the areas of semiconductor, high-tech materials, and next-generation mobility. At the same time, we have to figure out what we need to do in the newer industries such as AI, machine learning, algorithm, and environmental technologies, and aerospace science. We need to train more experts in these industries, and the technologies development and government supports are also becoming more important. In the past, schools educated the students, and companies worked on the technology development and commercialization, and the government provided institutional support. But this division of labor does not work any longer. Now, companies sometimes have to double as trainers and investors, and schools sometimes have to work on commercialization of technologies like companies. Government also need to go beyond the role of the rule setter and now lead the effort to strengthen the national competitiveness through incentives and positive policies. The challenges we face now cannot be overcome by schools, industries, or the government alone. All three need to work together, and what we really need is a new idea at the national level that incorporates politics and diplomacy. For example, I have been studying for 10 years how well-designed incentives can steer the society for good, and started to put in place a system called Social Progress Credit in 2015. Recently, this concept has been extended to the environmental issues, and we are trying to figure out incentive-based solutions at a national level. As you can see, we need to try things in an entirely new ways. We have to collect data from schools, businesses, and government, and we will have to produce early achievements, and we also need new ideas as to how to train human resources who can lead us into the future. I hope the experts from home and abroad can come up with good answers to these questions so to contribute to building strong national competitiveness in the face of global technological competition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Choi. The second keynote speaker in session 2 is the president of the Korean Federation of Science and Technology Societies. We will hear his presentation and go to the panel session. Lee Won-il has been known for his many activities. He's the president of the Korean Federation of Science and Technology Societies, as well as many other academic societies. Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Lee Woo-il. Thank you for inviting me to this very important forum. It is a great honor for me to be here. Thank you, Professor Kim Won-jun and President Lee Kwang-yong. As I listened to the previous presentations and discussions, we're talking about change taking place in the techno-geopolitical landscape. So what sort of strategy should we adopt? We heard to many experts from Korea as well as the US. In order to respond adequately to the change taking place, we have to first know ourselves and know our enemy, as Sun Tzu said in his famous book. It's also the same of knowing our strength and weaknesses, as the SWOT theory tells us. That is the basis for the right strategy. So I'd first like to take a look at the situation that we find ourselves in and what sort of things we lack. I've brought two images. The upper one is the Gwanmun Boulevard in 1966, and the bottom one is the same place in 2019. Our per capita GDP was $125 in 1966, but now it's over $30,000. So much has changed. You can see the contrast between the two photos. In the upper photos, you see a lot of buildings, but most of them have disappeared. The largest one was the City Council building, but that's disappeared. And then the famous art center has been built right next to the boulevard, and the huge government building has been constructed as well. What is the secret behind this strategy? I would say thorough planning and the midpoint entry strategy, as well as strong support for large corporations. In addition to that, we had the hard work from our people, who provided cheap labor for that success. In short, it was a fast follower strategy for us that allowed us the success that we enjoy right now. I'm not saying whether this is good or bad. I don't think we can make a judgment on that. At that time, that was the way to go, but now we need to go a different way. Anyhow, the fast follower strategy gave us a few habits rather than seeking creativity. We depended on manuals, and we tended to avoid challenges and taking risks. Furthermore, we selectively concentrated on a few areas. That is not necessarily bad, and I'll talk about this later on. Anyhow, these sort of things became part of our nature. This is the button that you commonly see in elevators. As you see, the close button is all worn out, but the open button is still new. And this is something that we can only see in Korean elevators. That shows us how focused we were on the fast follower strategy. But the problem is, this strategy really doesn't work anymore. Nevertheless, we're in this success trap because we're still preoccupied with this strategy. We have actually realized that the strategy doesn't work from some time ago. Nevertheless, we are unable to break away from it. I'll give you a few examples. This is a chart made by Professor Kim Se-jun from Seoul National University. He analyzed the economic growth trend in Korea, and it had nothing to do with the ruling government, whether it was conservative or progressive, liberal, it did not matter. Regardless of what kind of government was in power, our growth rate dropped by 1% every time. So in the next government, we will see another drop of 1% in our growth rate. Of course, there's a COVID impact. Nevertheless, this declining trend will continue. Until now, our growth depended on physical resources such as facilities and labor. But the physical capital is limited by the diminishing marginal production rule. That means that we have to shift to a dependency on human resources or human capital rather than physical capital. That's the solution. However, the overall global environment is changing as well. As you well know, humanity has depended on agriculture for a long time, but then the Industrial Revolution took place and what we call a manufacturing production capacity emerged. So people became more productive and the production increased immensely. Countries who saw the increase in productivity became the occupiers, and those who failed to do that were colonialized. We were colonized as well, but now we've worked hard and we've approached the blue line. Nevertheless, now another change is taking place. That is the knowledge-based industrial revolution. And when this knowledge-based society grows, the gap will widen again. If we are unable to ride this trend and adjust to or adapt to this new trend, we might experience the same gap that we experienced several decades ago during the colonial period. Let's look around at what's taking place. So there are some clear trends and clear game changers who have emerged, things that we've never heard of, like artificial intelligence, like quantum computing. The Sycamore quantum computer of Google is 160 million times faster than the fastest supercomputer that exists right now. Of course, there are limits, but these unimaginable things are happening place. In addition to that, we have climate change, infectious diseases. This infectious diseases or climate change were factors that we never even considered as factors in the past. In fact, these changes were there 20 or 30 years ago. If you look at the US, this is the share of intangible assets of the corporate assets among the 500 S&P companies. In the past, 80% of our corporate assets were physical, like plants or buildings, and only 17% were intangible assets. But this changed. In 2015, the situation is completely reversed. 87% is intangible assets, like know-how or technology. That means a total change in a business environment. But Korean companies still, or Korean economy still tends to depend on physical assets. This is another change, the demographic cliff. The birth rate is dropping. This year, we expect only 240,000 babies to be born this year. This used to be 1.1 million in the 1960s. That means the number of births is declining to 1/5 of what it used to be. This is the US case. X-axis is the number of employment, and the Y-axis is sales. In other words, production. You would think that the more sales, the more employment. And the higher the sales, the larger the employment. The relationship is almost linear. And based on this, if our population decreases to 1/5, our production will decrease to 1/5, and we will slowly decline and slowly disappear. If you look at this graph, however, you see that there are several outliers. This means that these outliers are outliers that have large sales despite small employment. This means that Korea has to increase the per capita production exponentially. That means becoming a totally different society, a totally different country. What about the climate crisis? Korea ranks 6th or 7th in the world in terms of total or per capita CO2 emissions. This is why we're being called the climate villain. Because there are countries like Australia. Another thing that's also important is the trend. The per capita CO2 emission shows that Korea is number one. That's followed by Turkey. And we continue to increase. We continue to increase until 2019. Other OECD countries have already started to decrease their per capita emission. That's why we're being called the climate villain. What does this mean? We need a major transformation of our industrial structure. We have the challenge of industrial restructuring, as well as demographic cliff, and fourth industrial revolution. But we had to change our nature anyways. That means that this sort of circumstantial changes or the environmental changes could turn out to be a blessing, just like the Asian financial crisis turned out to be a blessing for us. This is almost like the conclusion slide. We have to shift from our previous fast follower strategy to another strategy. We need a major transformation, and that starts with a change in our national science and technology system. The problem is we don't have much time. Time is running out on us, especially the political leaders do not seem to realize how serious the current situation is. Let's see how people in 1965 would have imagined 2000 to be. This is such a long time ago, and at that time change took place very slowly. In 1965, Korea's per capita income was $105. That was the first time it became 3 digits. The US was so far ahead and more like a grandfather to us. We couldn't imagine being a manufacturing company. But a cartoonist at that time imagined the year 2000 and draw this picture. He imagined 11 things to happen, and except for one, 10 things have become reality. Video phone, electric vehicles, all of these things that he imagined have come true. So much change is taking place. How much more change will take place? This means that we need to look not into our imagination, but into our fantasy, and that requires major change. In addition to that, as we heard in our previous session, the US and China is in serious competition with the two bipolar system based on the two superpowers. The first thing that is happening is a clash between the two, and in particular, technological competitiveness. After Biden took office, somebody summarized the tasks before Biden in 5 words. Niche. Next, COVID-19, industrial innovation, competition between US and China, human resources, energy and climate change. 5 of these things all concern science and technology. Human resources is also very related to science and technology. So in the case of the United States, they're moving very quickly. They have what they call the industries of the future, and they have selected 5 areas to focus their investment on into 2021. They also made an Industries of the Future, which is a research institute that is in charge of these tasks. And as it was mentioned in the previous session, USICA, or the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, was legislated this year, and it passed the Senate this year. So for the next 5 years, approximately $200 billion will be invested. This was announced in March. The National Security Commission on AI, which is chaired by Eric City, is based on the thought that AI will be the basis of economy, defense, and welfare. So there will be an impact analysis and a strategy will be formulated. So the U.S. is acting very quickly. What about Korea? We don't see these kind of things happening in Korea yet. What about China? They go even a step further. They've been establishing 5-year plans for a long time. And in the 14th 5-year plan, they presented a self-reliant technological roadmap. In the past, they were dependent on export, but now they're shifting their focus to the domestic market. And that strategy is called the dual circulation strategy. Furthermore, they want to become self-reliant. They're mindful of the U.S., and that has become the basis of their national strategy. Their plan is to increase R&D spending by 77% each year until 2025. It used to be 2.4 trillion won, which is over 400 trillion won in 2020. Korea's R&D spending is expected to be 30 trillion won next year. That means last year, China's R&D spending was several folds of Korea. Their investment in basic research amounts to about 25 billion won. They have selected 7 strategic areas for science and technology and industrial development. If you look at the technological level compared to the US, Korea is about 80% and China is also about 80%. The only way for Korea to go is to keep doing what we do well, but do it better. And it depends on us to decide what that is. In case of Korea, education, creativity, science and technology have to be the major area of focus. We need to nurture talents that befit the age of science and technology. Until now, all the government departments were compartmentalized, but now it has to be converged and qualitative assessment has to be made. That is the true convergence that we need. We need to overcome the silos that exist between the different academic disciplines as well. Furthermore, science and technology has to become an important diplomatic agenda for us in order for Korea to truly find the right place in the international stage. But we're not doing that. What are we actually focusing on? We're spending all our time arguing about how we select students for universities and how we split the budget between the central and local governments in educational budget. We only invested about 19 billion won in future education last year, and that has not changed much. And nothing is changing much. In 2024, the educational curricula will change. Math and science experts have been petitioning to the government for a long time. They said, if we continue the way we educate science and technology, we have no future. This was actually written as a major article in the newspaper. We lack vision or a grand scheme as of now. However, if you look at Article 127 of our Constitution, it says that the state shall strive to develop the national economy by developing science and technology, information and human resources, and encouraging innovation. In other words, we have the economic policy, and then the industrial policy that supports that, and the science and technology policy that supports the industrial policy. This is a scheme that is for the typical fast follower strategy. But now what's happening? We don't know what new technology will be the next one. We don't know what new product will be the next new product. economic policy, science and technology policy, they go hand in hand. The government can allocate resources in a certain industrial area so that it becomes a new growth area or growth driver. That means these three policies are not separate. The economic policies and science and technology policies still have to be linked in terms of result assessment, but the way the industry and science and technology policies are linked has to be seen from a totally different angle. That means that we need mission-oriented projects. We have so many global challenges. We have global challenges as well as domestic challenges like the population issue or the local, regional issues and the youth issues. We have to assign a mission. But we're already doing that, you might say. We are already focusing on creating jobs for the youth. We're already establishing goals for carbon neutrality. But there's something that we need to do before this. In mission-oriented project, the core or the key element is freedom and discretion. We have to give freedom and discretion in terms of spending the budget, etc., to achieve that mission. But what are we doing? We're saying you need to spend this much on that in order to achieve carbon neutrality. So everything is top down. But that has to change. There is a case of a successful mission-oriented project, which is DARPA. The innovation projects that came out of DARPA became the driver for many technologies in the U.S., like Siri or self-driving technology. And even the Moderna vaccine is a DARPA project. AstraZeneca, as well as Inovio, all were supported by DARPA. Another very important function is that by allowing freedom and discretion, we motivate scientists, we give them a sense of mission, and that allows them to bring in talented people. So that sense of mission plays a very important part. It also enables them to carry out high-risk, high-payoff projects. Those projects have to be supported and freedom has to be given in a very bold manner. As long as these sort of changes take place, we can achieve a shift in paradigm that we want, a paradigm that's based on creativity, that will allow us to maintain our gap and keep ahead as a small but strong nation. This is one of my favorite phrases. Take a look at the last part, which means there's nobody that doesn't move forward or move backward. That means that a status quo is impossible. Just fudging and muddling through means that we're not going forward but moving backward. So continuous renewal is not a choice, it's a must. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Well, I'm also a scholar who's studying economic development, and in my class, AIs and other technologies, how their impact to the economic development are some of the topics, and I really concur with Mr. Lee, and I think we can have a very productive discussion. I think we can go right into the discussion now. We have President Kim Eun-mi of Ewha Women's University and Professor Yoon Young-kwan of Seoul National University, and Professor Kim Lee-hwan, President of University of Science and Technology, are present. Professor Kim Won-jun, Director of ISPI, is going to moderate this session. Good morning. I am Kim Won-jun. I'm heading ISPI at KAIST. I thank you for coming today. Well, as Mr. Lee just mentioned, up until now, globally, for about 4 decades, we had a global sweet window, a very good time of window where GDPs of all countries have grown. However, including the technology race between US and China, and because of the climate change, well, another 4 decades in front of us will be quite different from the past. So in this new paradigm, what is the direction Korea should take? And also the government is going to change in 4 short months. So this will be a very important time. So the experts are here to discuss the future direction of Korea. So I'd like to once again thank the 4 presenter and discussants. And President Lee has outlined the challenges of Korean society and also future directions. We had the strategy of fast follower, which was successful in the past. However, in the future, we need a new paradigm, a new strategy. And he has painted a visionary picture. He talked about mission-oriented technology, and also he talked about the education of STEM education. So, one of the immediate concern is that a new global value chain is being formed with the US at the center. However, Korea has China right next to us, and also we have the US who's trying to reconfigure this value chain, and we are caught in the middle. So this is a science and technology problem. However, it's also a national strategy problem. So what direction should we take? So this will be the topic of the first discussion. And maybe President Kim Hee-hwan can talk about what he thinks on this issue. Thank you for the invitation. KAIST is located at Daedok R&D Center. So before we tackle the issue of US-China issue, I thought about where we are. Next year it'll be 2022. And next year will mark 40 years of R&D incentives. And we have a Promotion Act for S&T, and that was enacted in 1972. So we have to look back. Otherwise, we cannot really chart our future path. So, as President Lee said, the government R&D will be about 30 trillion Korean won. And combining with the private ones, it will be about 110 trillion. And we have 430,000 R&D personnel. And right now, the export of technology has grown. And also we have private R&D centers, which that number is more than 20,000. So we've been doing very well in terms of building the infrastructure for science and technology. But is this strategy or is this policy going to work in the future? I don't think so. We are talking about US-China technology race, and also you talked about the intangible assets, and I think the technology race is a good example. Well, the globalization and technology development has been working in one way. However, with the globalization, the direction has shifted. Up until now, there has been those people who've been benefited from globalization. However, it's been backfired. Especially, it's backfiring to countries like the United States and China, and that is why they're fighting. It's going beyond economy and trade, and they're fighting over technology, and technology now is related to national security. And Korean companies, especially the big ones, are caught between the two, and I guess the same goes for the government. However, if you go look at the government organization, the trade negotiation is under the Ministry of Commerce. However, the strategy is dealt with in another organization. Just like NSC, economy, trade, and science and technology, national security, they need to be looked at. We need a coordination or one entity that can deal with all of these issues. So now we are going to have a new president, a new government next year. So I guess the new government should think about having a different system to tackle with this issue.
Thank you. If I can summarize what you just said, you are saying that the government itself has to be restructured as part of our future strategy. You're talking about the government's governance. Yes, the reorganization of the government is something that takes place every 5 years when there's a change of government. Government restructuring or organizational restructuring is important, but the way we worked is also different. National R&D spending exceeds 100 trillion won right now. And it's time that we reassess our science and technology ecosystem. We've been very successful as a science and technology powerhouse. When you grow, you can also grow by planting trees. But if you want to be a leading country, you can't just plant the trees. You have to take care of the forest and look at the larger forest than the individual trees. It's time for us to look at the forest. As the president just said, the collaboration or cooperation between the government and industrial businesses is very important. We have many institutions at the Dasak Research Complex. We have about 40 plus national research institutes. The cooperation between the private sector and the government or the company-to-company cooperation as well as research-to-research company are also the same. We have to analyze exactly where we are, what we are. Otherwise, no matter what type of planning we do, it will be useless. We talk about R&D governance. In 1982, we launched a few research projects, and right now we don't have any government ministries that's not related to science and technology. Based on the project started with the Ministry of Science and Technology, it has expanded to many other ministries. So disintegration and increased efficiency took place. But now it's time for another type of integration to take place. We have the Innovation Center at the Science and Technology Ministry. But I don't think that's enough. We need something that's more powerful than that. We need an entity that takes a larger place in the government and an entity that can integrate all the science and technology policies. Otherwise, we can't go beyond where we are. Until now, the government strategy has been what we call a team strategy. It's because governments last only until only 5 years. Everything was based on inputs. It was an input strategy. When a new government comes in, they forget all the inputs and then they select other inputs. This means a disjunction takes place every 5 years. We need to make sure that we don't lose the sustainability or continuity. External organizations and functions of government plays a very important part. So I hope that the next government can restructure the government so that it is based on innovation, management of science and technology. Thank you very much. UN also. Oh, we have Professor or President Kim Mi, who has been very active in the United Nations as well. So would you like to comment or respond to this question? Yes, thank you. It's good to see all of you and take part in this very important forum. Thank you very much for inviting me. As Professor Lee said, and as Professor Kim said, I also believe that the US and China hegemony competition is taking place, and there are 2 or 3 very important things for us to keep in mind in such a circumstances. At the UN, I realize how important the international norm is, and how important the international organizations are, because they can act as a buffer between the US and China. From 2020, the Sustainable Development Goal, SDG, was launched, and I was involved in that. In 2019, for the first time, the UN requested that we submit a critical report. So 15 scholars and scientists were selected throughout the world and worked on that report. In the Global Sustainability Report of 2018, we looked at many things. But one of the most important things that caught my eye was the amount of R&D spending, and a map that showed that. That map showed that the advanced countries, or the Northern Hemisphere countries, were so much larger than the countries in the Southern Hemisphere. So it was concentrated, R&D spending was concentrated in the North Hemisphere. Furthermore, the R&D resources came mostly from the private part. So R&D spending was concentrated in the north and concentrated in the private sector. That means when it comes to basic science or other important parts, those were also treated in the report as well. But the topic of most interest was the geographical distribution of R&D spending. That means that map itself was quite shocking. I knew about it, but the map showed me how serious the inequality was. This is why I've always been emphasizing the importance of cooperation with developing countries and how we can contribute to the global society as a country. Respect for international norms And respect for international order is important. We have to become a country that can lead the international order, the science and technology development or educational development or democratization that Korea achieved are very important achievements. That has to be the basis of our leadership. We need to comply with international norms, but at the same time go one step ahead of others and lead. Another important thing that I realized while looking at the report was that we need to make more friends with developed countries. R&D investment and R&D research is important for developing countries. So Korea has to lead the way of building universities that have the capacity for R&D in developing countries. We need more friendly nations to fulfill our role as a middle power. I think I'll have an opportunity to address this in the questions that are to come later on. But as the global paradigm shifts, we have to look at other countries and expand cooperation, not only in technological aspects, but in other areas as well. We also have to make sure that Korea contributes to enable all of this cooperation, whether it's development cooperation or whether it's in technological cooperation. We have to become one of the leaders. We have to go beyond our domestic perspective and look at it from a global perspective. It's time that Korea fulfills that role.
Well, she has presented a solution from a different perspective. A global cooperation is necessary, and also developing countries should be taken into consideration. Well, she talked about, she mentioned the foreign relations aspect. So I guess Professor Yoon can also add to this. So Professor Yoon, you're here?
지금 뮤트가 돼 있으신 것 같습니다.
I think he's on mute now. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this forum. Well, technology is something that has changed the human history for 500 years or 600 years. Only with technology you can grow economy, and only we have a strong economy, we can have a strong military. This was the cycle. And now we are at a point where the hegemony of the US is at stake, and the challenger, it's being challenged by China. So this is a sort of a big picture, historical view. However, unfortunately for Korea, USA is our ally, and China, we have a very close economic relations. Well, if we want to discuss the importance of technology, we are witnessing the beginning of US-China technology race. If you look at the result of the summit meeting between Korea and the US, they have emphasized the cooperation in terms of technology, and also the Korean companies have been recognized. And these are not just the matter of technology or economy, however, they can also spill into the foreign relations issue. So the question is, what Korea need to do between China, which is becoming a economic giant, and also United States, who's trying to restructure the value chain. Basically, different industries, different sectors, and different products have their unique qualities and different dynamics. And also there will be different countries who are leading in those sector or industry. And also Korea's position in that network will be also different. So we have to take this case by case. We have to take each sector, each product differently. So in the first keynote session, a very important issue was discussed. And if you look at all the speakers, all three speakers, they all talk about technological alliance. They have emphasized the importance of this alliance. And basically, I agree with them. So the global value chain led by the US, this is something that we need to participate. So through the technological cooperation, we can also upgrade our own technology, science and technology. But if you are left out, then you will become a slow follower. You will lag behind. And considering the fast pace the world is moving nowadays, the US-led value chain is something that we need to participate. And for China, we have to try really hard to maintain the good economic relationship. However, the problem is there are some strategically sensitive industries such as semiconductor, 5G, communication, or AI. These are very sensitive and they are strategic because they are directly related to national security. So in these areas, well, we will have to be very careful not to get too close to China. I guess the US will be watching closely as to what Korean companies are doing. For example, Samsung Semiconductor producing whether they are producing chips for Huawei in place of TSMC. If they do, Korea or Samsung will be left out in the market of strategic communications equipment, which US has about half of the world market. Like President Kim mentioned, Korea is caught between the United States and China, but but at the same time, we have to look for a third way. Mechanisms like ASEAN and but I think we have to consider India as an opportunity. India has the potential to become a superpower in the future, and some people say that even if China wins over and it becomes the superpower, it's not going to last long because India is right behind China. So we need to have a strategic approach to India, and we have to watch India closely and look for ways to increase cooperation and investment. Basically, In India, there's no political risk. However, there is a problem of lack of infrastructure, and that'll be the area where we are going to run some cost. However, we need to do some calculation as for the cost and benefit, because the situation is going to change. So we need to have a strategic approach to countries like India.
Thank you. President Kim Un-mi talked about creating a third area or third region to create a balance of power. And we need to approach this from a differentiated strategy and also establish a new relationship in a very careful manner based on science and technology. Japan or Europe or other Asian countries do not face the same geopolitical situation as Korea. In other words, having North Korea as a challenge. That is why Korea needs to be very cautious in its approach. Korea needs to be wiser and also adopt a differentiated strategy. Would President Lee Will like to add comments to that? Thank you very much for your comments. If I can add one thing. There's the issue of developing countries that President Kim Un-mi mentioned, and I fully agree with her. We've carried out many activities, but according to my few experiences, we're not giving what the developing countries want. We give them what we believe they need or want. I think developing countries have a very special view of us. I once had a chance to talk with the president of Panama University and the Panama ambassador. I asked why so many Panama students came all the way to Korea to study, and they said it's because Korea is the only developing country or underdeveloped country that became a rich country now. And based on that experience, they wanted to hear our story and get advice from us. I think that's a great intangible asset of Korea. We used to have what we call third countries, which has disappeared after the fall of USSR. But Professor Yoon said the third region, he mentioned the third region. I think perhaps we can strategically approach this third region based on the assets that we have.
Well, now we have to choose between China and the United States, and there has been a very good ideas to consider. Now we need to get more practical. Well, the selection, the choice of a country or the government, and the choice of the businesses can be different. And also, if you consider the foreign relations, the solution or the choice might be different. So maybe Professor Yoon and President Kim can talk about this. Professor Yoon. If I may, I'd like to explain the situation, what's happening between the US and China, and then come to the situation of Korea. As I have mentioned, the US is incumbent superpower, and China is emerging superpower. And the 2018 is the year where the relationship changed. The U.S. they wanted to work with China because if we trade and invest, and China is going to have a change to society, which will be more democratic and more liberated. However, that did not work. It didn't happen. So now the relationship has become very hostile, irreversibly. So the US-China race are happening in about 5 areas. There is technology and economy. It is downright race or competition. Well, we are talking about technology today. In the technology area, there is a fierce competition or fierce war between the two. And same goes with economy. So we are talking about decoupling of the two economies. And there is an area of ideology and military. In terms of ideology, Chinese are saying that what they have is better than democracy. They want to spread their idealism or ideology to other parts of the world, and on the other hand, the U.S. is trying to defend theirs. And in the military front, China, there is a fear that China wants to forcefully dominate Taiwan, and also there is a confrontation or a tension at the South China Sea. So it has gone beyond competition. Now they are at a confrontation. However, there are also areas, the global issues where the two need to cooperate. Climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, and also they are talking about cooperating in the North Korea issue. So, what choice does the Korean government should take? In terms of in the area of technology, of course, we need to cooperate. For economy, also, we need to cooperate. For the ideology, Korea is a democratic free nation. And for global issues like climate change and pandemic, Korea needs to take an active role and provide the global goods. However, in the military front, we need to be careful. We need to be more cautious. Because we have a military alliance with the United States, and usually they are there to defend from the threat of North Korea. However, with the relationship between U.S. and China turning sour, Korea need to be careful as to nothing happens between the U.S. and China, because we are in a very special situation. So that, I believe, should be the direction of Korean government. And in the context of technology, as I've mentioned, Korea need to actively participate in the US-led value chain in order to get what we want. And also in mechanisms like Quad, we need to also cooperate. So we need to be active in the technological cooperation, and also for the recovery from pandemic. And I believe these will be beneficial to Korea.
Thank you. President Kim? Yes, Professor Yun said a few things which I fully agree with. I would just like to mention two things. The question was about the fact that the choice of the government and the choice of the businesses can be different. In this respect, maybe science, technology, and advanced technologies are areas where it's very important for Korea to be a leader. People have been very interested in the launch of the recent space Nuri spaceship, but that in itself gave Korea great hope. The government's choice and the diplomatic or geopolitical issues can be combined to expand our view. And I think two things are worth mentioning here is the cooperation with developing countries requires us to think about the possibility or potential of India. And even in the context of development cooperation, we need to strengthen cooperation with other countries other than the usual countries. So I fully agree with what he said. The reason why we're interested in higher education is because in MDG and SDG, elementary school or middle school has to be guaranteed as a public good. That's the argument of SDG and SDG. So a promise was made to the international society of providing education. But aside from that, I believe Korea was able to achieve what it did because of the role of higher education, especially when it comes to science and technology. Higher education has to lead, it has to be there with it. When we talk with developing countries, if we only provide middle or high school education and abandon higher education, well, that means that even if the developing countries go overseas to studies, they won't be able to come back home and find the right jobs for them. So brain drain keeps on happening. In this respect, Korea can be an example for other countries. And it can also play a leading role in trying to collect and converge the different opinions of countries. That will allow us to be a good and a trustworthy partner to developing countries. 2 weeks ago, I was able to travel for the first time since the COVID crisis. So it's the first time I traveled overseas in 1 year and 8 months. It was a conference on development cooperation taking place in Brussels. Cooperation with the EU is very important for Korea, and I think we need to leverage our cooperative relationship with EU and also diversify the areas of cooperation. In particular, in Brussels, there is the company Solvay, which Ewha University established an MOU in 2011. In the Research and Innovation Center of Solvay, they research many areas such as batteries or lightweight materials. The reason why I'm talking about this is because I fully agree, 150%, that we need to be part of the value chain that the U.S. is creating, but we also need to look at the niche area, the areas that the U.S. is overlooking, or areas where the U.S. is not necessarily the leader. If we can develop things and lead in these niche areas, it would be beneficial for all. In this respect, the partnership with EU could be very effective, and we need to look more in the possibility of cooperating with the EU in technology. They are, of course, cutting-edge advanced technology, but research cooperation or development cooperation in these niche areas can be very good and important in terms of diversity. There's a saying that we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. That's a US motto. And if we apply this to technological cooperation, that means we need to be active in identifying niche area for cooperation. President Kim Il-sung talked about this, but it would be good if the government has some sort of mechanism that allows the government to take a very broad view on all of these issues and empower the efforts for diversification.
윤 교수님께서
Thank you. Professor Yoon
보다 적극적인
talked about more active participation in the new value chain created by the United States. And also for the sensitive military front, we need to decrease the tension, but all the more we need to work together. And also President Kim mentioned that in terms of science and technology, we need to be very good and we need to lead the world. And also we need to diversify our front of engagement with the developing countries. And so for the in order to overcome the challenge of the US-China tension, is the solution lies how Korea can have a unique and strong capacity. Up until now, through 80s and 90s, Korea was able to secure the competitiveness in areas like semiconductors. So the countries are careful with Korea, both China and the United States. And that is why the US is trying to include Korea in their value chain. Just like President Kim said, we have the capability and also industrial capability. However, will they last in the future? So, can Korea maintain the irreplaceable competitiveness in science and technology? Or in order to maintain this capability, what do we need to do? In order to have advantage or competitiveness in science and technology, what do we need to do? So maybe President Kim Il-sung can talk about a few things. Well, the roles of the government and the private sector should be differentiated. Well, right now, the private sector and the government is moving at the same level. Maybe because of the governance or the single-term government. Well, the role of government is during the big picture. So especially in the basic studies. And also we need to build or produce human resources. However, in the private sector, it's not easy to have a long-term view. So we have to have a clear picture as to what the businesses are doing in terms of R&D. So the private sector counts for about 80% of the R&D spending in Korea. And among them, actually 20 big companies take up 80%. And small and medium companies, well, there are more than 40,000 R&D institutes. However, less than 1,000 belong to the big companies.
정부가 직접적인 팁만 가지고 산업
So I have talked about inputs. So I think it's impossible for the government to do all the inputting.
벤처기업도
We have the small companies and venture companies. So we have to categorize or differentiate the companies in terms of their core competitiveness and provide differentiated support so the companies themselves can strengthen their capabilities. And as for the human resources, now we have to break away from this concept that it's only the schools that are training students. I believe the private sector needs to be more active. So whatever they have studied, they're going to come out of the college and work in the companies. So the businesses need to work with the schools to create the right talent for the businesses. And the international trade was mentioned. Well, we talked about the third region, but maybe we can work with. We can have a diplomatic ties with the developing countries and emerging nations, and maybe we have younger generations that are coming up, and we need to work with these people. But first, we need to have a clear take on the current situation in order to be the leader in the science and technology area in the future.
차별화된
We need to enhance the science and technology capacity of corporations, and we also need to nurture talents in science and technology. Science and technology is basically embedded in people, so talents are very important for science and technology. Also, leveraging the baby boom generation is important because remember when we invited Japanese experts, when we tried to nurture our key industries such as the steel industry or chemical industry. So, and at that time, we took advantage of retired Japanese experts. That means we could leverage the retired baby boom generation, baby boomer generations, to our benefit. Professor Lee talked about this. Earlier. But what do you think is the most important for Korea to enhance its competitiveness in science and technology in the future? There's the role of the government and the role of the private sector. I think the private sector is doing very well. Until now, the government used to say, hey, follow me. But in the future, the private sector's role is going to become larger. Nevertheless, the government still has a significant role to play. President Kim Il-sung said that basically it's about people and we need to nurture talent. So it is inseparable from our educational policy. There are so many things that I can talk about this, but one key aspect is the need to give universities more freedom. The government gives guidelines, for example, select 30% of your students this way, 70% of your students that way. But after the COVID crisis, it's going to go back to face-to-face activities. Nevertheless, I'm so worried that we might go back to exactly the same way it used to be 2 years ago. When it comes to post-COVID, face-to-face education, there are so many things that we need to think about and how we're going to change. For the fast follower policies, industry was below economy, and the science and technology used to be below industrial policy. But we need to maintain the leading gap that we have right now. That means that these different policies have to be linked in a different manner. We need to take a different approach so all the different policies become more effective, and that requires change on the part of the government. For example, more freedom, autonomy, measuring success, all require some research and study.
Well, you talked about human resources, and you talked about the autonomy of the universities. Well, in our school, we are thinking about what percentage of online class should we continue. So and utilizing this as an opportunity, maybe we can think about the autonomy of the universities and the governance of science and technology. I think it's a very important issue. And the policy direction and governance for science and technology should be one of the most important issues for the future. Well, President Kim Un-mi, well, what do you think is the most important factor to maintain the leadership in science and technology? I'm sorry, Professor Yoon Young-kwan. Education and institutions for science and technology, well, the basic framework for that, I believe there is still following the protocols or paradigm of the 70s and 80s. So now we are talking about AIs and 5Gs and advanced technologies. So there is a mismatch between the policies and the actual technologies we need to develop. So we need to narrow the gap. So the policies, legal framework, and education, they have a catch-up to do with the current situation. I guess that should be the role of the leadership when we consider the future of Korea. For example, I've been teaching at school for a long time, and something just felt strange because there is a division of human studies and there's a STEM. So there are some students who are crossing the barrier. However, we have a very clear-cut division between the two. And it's not right because we need to have a more comprehensive view of what's happening. We need to have a system that allows clear movement between all the areas. However, now we have an educational system that's blocking that. For example, Mr. Lee, you talked about the importance of the autonomy of the universities. Well, everybody's talking about the importance of AI, and we need to develop the area quickly. However, there is a limitation of the number of students who can learn AI. So we need several hundreds, but we can only teach several, a lot less than that, because the number of students is controlled by the government. So we need to change that quickly. And the governance for science and technology should be upgraded. So all these barriers and siloed organizations need to be changed. And also we need to have a more free flow of information and communication between the government bodies and the think tanks. And I believe that's what the government should do.
Thank you. A while ago, this was mentioned at another forum. In the 60s and 70s, the current system and the laws were established. So we're leaving the framework together and only changing the content. That means the framework is going to fall down. The systems and the legal framework that we have right now really is not adequate for what we are trying to do right now, because they were tailored for the fast follower strategy. You mentioned that and also talked about the issue of governance. President Kim and me, would you like to talk about what things we must change in science and technology? I'd like to say one thing. I mentioned this earlier, but the global public goods is something that the science and technology sector has to think about seriously. In technology or economy, Korea ranks one of the top 10. But we need to think about how we contribute to the global common good or the global public good if we want to become a leader in science and technology. While studying the SDG, I recognize that there are 4 areas, the 4 goals of SDG, which is going backward because of the pandemic. That is climate change response, the second is biological diversity, and global inequality. Inequality is so widespread and pervasive. Remember the movie Parasite that was a big hit, and the recent Squid Game series that is received worldwide with such enthusiasm. That's because throughout the world, everyone is realizing the seriousness of inequality. So that's a 3rd goal. The 4th is ecological footprint. That's about production or waste production, which are global issues that Korea should contribute to address. These 4 SDG goals are in some ways areas where science and technology or innovation can play a very important part in resolving. If Korea can give what is needed globally, that will give us a certain leadership. It's important to be a leader, but it's also important to share. We need to share the burden and share the pain in order to become a true leader. However, it's not just about giving without anything in return. We are going to get much in return for our global contribution.
Well, she's mentioned a very important aspect. So in order to solve the global challenges, Korea needs to take more active role. Well, we are behind the schedule, so we will have to wrap this session up. Well, I think we are at a very important point in terms of timing, because a new government is going to come in next year, and also we are at the point of great paradigm shift. But we need to talk about the importance of science and technology more. So maybe I can give 1 minute each to wrap up the session. Mr. Lee, you want to go first? Well, I'll just mention one thing. Leadership is important. Well, it's in times of confusion like this. Well, what direction and what should the leaders should do? the most important trait for the leader is that, first of all, they have to recognize the pace of change. In the old age of industrial age, there is something that there was a framework. However, now we have crossed the river. Now we have arrived in an entirely new terrain. So we need to think about the new systems and new paradigm that's going to work in this new era. Well, we are not rich, but we are now much more well-to-do in a very short period of time. But we don't realize that we are here. We have made it. We have arrived. We are now comfortable, and we have developed the country. However, our heads are still in the 60s and 70s. So we need to break away from that. So we need to change the framework we are in.
Yes, President Kim. What I'd like to say is something that you already know well, the importance of science and technology, and the fact that science and technology is not a single academic discipline. It's something that determines our future. It's a basic element that will define the way we live. That means the value of science and technology is something that the whole nation must share. In this respect, the awareness of making science and technology more approachable to the general population is not really going strong right now. So we need to allow the general populace to realize the importance and value of science and technology. The capacity of science and technology has become the capacity of a nation. That means politicians as well as scientists and engineers must not forget. In the past, we grew at a fast pace, but now we need to break away from that mindset. We need to throw away what we're familiar with, because right now we seem to be just moving based on our habit. But habit means that soon people become tired of it, and that means that right now it's a time to think about the great transformation.
President Kim and me. Thank you. Well, we've been talking about global big things, so I'd like to move to Ewha Women's University. The Korea has become 10th biggest economy in the world. However, if Davos Forum comes out with gender disparity, and how high do you think we rank? We are at 102. We are 102, and that has been that was improved from the past. Basically, because of the income disparity and also because of the opportunities to move higher, basically the glass ceilings. So Korea ranked 102 in terms of gender discrimination. So maybe we can include topics like gender or disabilities. So these are areas we need to pay more attention, so these people can also study science and technology and improve their situation.
Yes, you mentioned something very important as your concluding remarks. I hope that Korea improves at a fast pace in this area as well. So thank you for that comment. Finally, Professor Yoon Young-kwan, would you like to say a few final words? Yes, thank you. What I talked about earlier was also repeated by other speakers. The most important task that we face right now is making sure that Korea does not lag in a world that is led by technological development and innovation. And that requires our system and legal framework to befit the new era. The system related to science and technology that Korea has, for example, regulations, restrictions, all have to be overhauled because right now the framework we have in Korea was made in the fast development stage. The reason why this is so hard is because in all of this reform that has to take place, we have so many stakeholders and groups that have interest in the established system. This is why the task becomes even more important. Furthermore, governance related to science and technology has to be changed. The leader of the government and the ministries have to join hands. But right now, all the ministries are in their own silos, and this impedes inter-ministerial cooperation, and that makes it more hard to achieve whatever goal that we have set up. So we need a new governance system that allows a more comprehensive and inclusive cooperation to take place, and this is where the government's role becomes important. I hope that next year we elect a president that can be very good at this job.
Everything that I have talked about is a very important topic. And if we put our heads together to find a solution and direction, we believe we are going to have better chance of tackling these issues. Once again, I'd like to thank all the participants. Thank you. Now we are approaching the last part of this forum. We are going to hear from Director Son Hun of GSI, KAIST.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Son Hun, and I'm the head of the KAIST Global Strategy Research Institute. We've talked about advanced technological edge of Korea and how we need to respond to technological innovations taking place in the era of global technological hegemony. Our research institute was established last year. It reports directly to the KAIST president. We are in charge of establishing strategy in the mid to long term for our institution, as well as growing to be a global think tank, thinking about the future of Korea. We've conducted several forums from last year. For example, the importance of international cooperation in the corona pandemic era, how the education system will change in the post-COVID era, how biological medicine will bring about change, and how metaverse will affect technological change. These were the topics that we dealt with at our fora. Until now, we've conducted our fora in English, but at this forum, we've been talking in Korean in the second session, and it's quite fortunate me because I can deliver my closing remarks in Korean. I'd like to thank President Lee Young-hwang, Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum, Vice Minister Yong Hong-taek, who delivered their welcoming remarks. I'd also like to thank the many speakers who joined us online. For example, Professor Scott Stern, Professor Aaron Chatterjee, and Professor Sarah Krabs. I thank them deeply for taking part in our forum despite the very inconvenient hours. I'd also like to thank Mr. Kim Bo-won, the Vice President Kim Bo-won, Professor Yoon Young-kwan, Professor Lee Il, President Kim Eun-min, and President Choi Byung-han. I'd also like to thank the many viewers, the online viewers and the KTV viewers, as well as the many staff members of our institute for staying with us until the very end. I'd also like to thank Professor Kim So-young from the KPC for IR, as well as Professor Kim Won-jun from ISPI, and also Professor Kim Ji-hee for acting as the moderator. And truly, finally, we are also going to hold a Seoul Technology Conference on December 10th. It's going to be organized by our institution and the Sustainability Division of our institution. So please, I ask for your interest in this upcoming forum as well.